Hey everybody, Jason Sheftel here, and today we're going to talk about Xi Jinping at the World Economic Forum. So the World Economic Forum is a big get-together of the who's who of the financial, military, economic world, basically. All sorts, the whole ruling class of the world basically gets together in Europe for a big event. And this is often where world leaders, as well as commentators and economists and business leaders, all opine about the world and what they think is going to happen and everything going on. There's been a lot of big announcements from the Chinese side over the years, stuff with the Belt and Road Initiative and all sorts of things at this event. And this year, there's a lot of interesting things said. I might just go over them one at a time over a couple days, because just each of these is really something you can pick apart and really chew on, because we're getting to the point where the reality of China is really being exposed and you can't really hide it anymore. So every single thing that Xi Jinping said at the World Economic Forum is actually incredibly interesting, and we're going to sort of break it down. So the first one tonight, is going to be what Xi Jinping said about globalization. Basically, what he said was that globalization, it's the continuation of globalization, is inevitable. It is the inevitable fate of the world, right? That is what he said. And in China, this was big news, at least depending on what you mean by big. There's a lot of people who just look at celebrity news and all sorts of other things. But in China in general, the Global Times, which is the great nationalist tabloid rag that is heavily affiliated with the Communist Party, it made this front page news. Basically, front and center news in China was Chairman Xi going to Davos and declaring to the world that globalization would continue, and the implied part to that was that China would be a leading force in this global push, right? This global force for integration around the world. And this is a very interesting thing for him to say, right? So if you go back 6 years now to when the Trump candidacy and then presidency was going on, there was this big backlash about nationalists versus globalism versus nationalism, and how all these things were a problem. And there was a big globalist sort of backlash. And this was in the political sphere. In the electoral politics, a lot of countries, there was sort of a large push by particularly right-wing countries in South America, but primarily Europe and then the United States, to correct some of what we're seeing as the excesses of globalization. And that's kind of faded as COVID has just overwhelmed our lives. But this is still there in the background. And what COVID is actually doing is it's accelerating a trend in the opposite direction. We're definitely learning that the world needs everyone, right? You need every piece of the world, because we have these primarily because we have these really large global supply chains that require every country, or they require many countries, and they require countries to cooperate. And that's very true. But at the same time, globalization is clearly in the retreat everywhere, quite literally everywhere. And this is one of the big stories of this decade. It's going to be deglobalization, or the continuation of deglobalization, not the continuation of globalization. And the idea that Xi Jinping thinks that's what's happening is bizarre, to say the least, but that's not really what's going on. What's really going on is that he is saying what China wants or needs to be the case, not what is the case. China needs globalization. It cannot function without it. Modern China is the house that globalization built. China is the place actually that has prospered the most because of globalization. All these backlashes around the world were in part backlashes against China. And the fact that China has become so prominent, so powerful, it's accumulated so much of the wealth and productive capacity and dynamism that people associated with the West, right, with other countries for a very long time. And that in this world of globalization, it seems like a lot of centrifugal forces have been pulling the dynamism, the energy of the world economy towards China. And people did not like that around the world. But China, quite clearly, quite obviously, loves that. Why would it not love that? Who wouldn't love that, right? If everything good was coming to your front doorstep, that's a pretty awesome thing. And the thing that's also kind of being not really unsaid, it's quite obvious here, is China, if China is the house that globalization built, then without globalization, that house is going to fall apart. And that's really, well, I wouldn't say obvious at this point, but it's pretty clear, because China is no longer the place that has everything. I might have touched on this on some other live streams, some other videos, but China, since around 2017, China has functionally had, as a baseline, a current account deficit, right? So that means that roughly speaking, that the imports and exports balance out towards the import side. And COVID, unfortunately, has sort of muddied the waters as the world system has tried to adapt to this new pandemic. But the base case is that China actually needs a lot of things from the rest of the world. And that makes a lot of sense because it has built so many things in China and it doesn't have all the things it needs, whether it's basic minerals or other commodities or specialty goods or really advanced electronics or everything, basically software. It doesn't really matter what it is. China doesn't have all of it. And that is why we're seeing what we're seeing, because China no longer just needs globalization to develop and to grow, right? That was what it was in the 90s and the 2000s. By the end of the 2010s, China needed globalization just to keep treading water. That's where we really are. We're not at a place where, oh God, without globalization, I'm no longer going to have 10% economic growth. It's like, no, without globalization, you're not going to have 3 or 4% economic growth at best. You're going to have very, very, very big problems. And that is what China is saying. Like when Xi Jinping goes to Davos here in 2022, this is not the same China of 10 years ago. It is both more developed, more advanced, more modernized, that's true, but it is also more vulnerable, more dependent, and in many ways more afraid of what can go wrong. So this is a country and a chairman and president and general secretary, all the many, many titles that Xi Jinping now has. This is a leader, a Chinese leader, speaking out of fear in a lot of ways, because he knows that there is no world where a deglobalized world benefits China, regardless of what it may say about wanting to supplant the United States or anything else. If the global system fails along with anything else, China definitely falls with it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out all the other ones, like this one, subscribe, put on notifications, and I will see